that, the materials in front of you, hopefully you've had a chance to download those. Again, if you didn't, the chat function, the Zoom control panel, there will be a link there you can download to get those. Let's set the table for this agenda. It's pretty short and sweet today as far as the agenda. We're going to look back at the year that has been so far, make sure you didn't miss anything, help set those priorities for things that maybe have fallen through the cracks, or we need to have them rise back up to the surface to make sure we get it done before whatever the deadline is on that particular item. We're also going to look ahead, help you plan as we go from 2022 to 2023, and then again, that short segment of Q&A on the other side. If you'll open up that material and start to flip through it, the first few pages are alphabetized. Let you read through that on your own. Want to get to what you came here for, and that's the headlines from the past year and helping set up as we flip the corner into 2023. Let's go to page number 1 in the materials. We're going to start with 2022, the year that we've traveled through so far, and say, all right, what's gone on? And every year when I prepare for this, when our team prepares for this, I'm kind of shocked at how many things we were able to put down on paper. I went back and looked about 4 or 5 years ago. We started doing this, and I want to say the first one we did had like 20 things that we had to cover in the 1-hour time frame, and now we've got almost 60 things, which means we're going to be, by the time you paste everything together here, about 35 to 45 seconds per item as we go through it here today. So again, you can go back and listen to this and catch some things if you miss them, or there's a link with each and every single item that you'll be able to go read more than what we're probably going to be able to cover during our program here today. So we're going to start with January of this year. The CFPB put out a blog, and you're going to find out they do that a lot, more so than they've ever done in the past. This blog happened to be a reminder that when we're dealing with lending, particularly, that religious considerations and affiliations are not something we should be seeking out in questioning through applications and discussions with our applicant a credit transaction. Okay? It's one of the protected characteristics associated with Regulation B, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and the Fair Lending Regulations. So my takeaway here is this: make sure that your lender's questionnaires, formal, informal, are not asking about religion or religious affiliation. Also, pay attention to the comments your loan officers are making in their files. The fact that somebody has gone to church with somebody for X number of years, I get they're trying to describe the character, but religion has zero place in that comment. You need to get that out of there, and it's one of those things we need to remind people. There's 8 things to steer clear of in Reg B. It's really simple to trip over something. Oh, it accidentally made its way into the file. So just a warning there, or a reminder along the way. Second item. This is a FinCEN proposal. They're putting together a pilot program that would allow the sharing of SARs with foreign affiliates. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. For those of you that don't have foreign affiliates and branches and things like that, it's a non-issue. But those that do, this is an important pilot program to allow for some sharing to occur in that space. Now, number 3. We're kind of going to begin with this, and it's the bookend on the other end of 2022. It's the most recent thing that has come out. And so this is the CFPB laying the groundwork for this junk fee discussion that has continued throughout 2022. And so this is kind of their introduction to their initiative to root out junk fees. And you have to read the information, but they're going after your overdraft fee. They're going after your return deposit fee. And we'll get to those a little bit later on here today, but this is where they started to lay the groundwork for that and begin that discussion on junk fees. Make sure your board and management is aware of the progression that has occurred this year. They very likely are aware of the most recent, which we'll come to a little bit later on. Let's go to number 4. Appraisal discrimination is illegal. This is another one that you're going to hear about a couple different times. Again, this is the CFPB kind of laying that foundation for what's going to come a little bit later on here. Now, there's a couple things that I want you to take away from these paragraphs here. You don't need to read them now, but they're looking at revamping the appraisal industry. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that for the moment because that's going to come later. This is really a warning to make sure that you, as part of your internal evaluation of appraisals and any evaluations that aren't deemed appraisals, that you're reviewing statements made by the evaluator, the appraiser. And not just the comps and the safety and soundness stuff, but what are they saying about the neighborhood, the makeup of the people that dwell there, or the businesses that are there? They've found that there are some troubling statements that have been made throughout the country relative to areas, neighborhoods, et cetera. And so make sure that's part of your review process as well. And you're going to hear more about that one as we go along. Number 5 is kind of the same way. Overdrafts. It's going to be a broken record as we go through this. Again, they've done a lot of research over the years. They set the stage late last fall in 2021, actually just after this session a year ago. They put out some information on overdrafts. and they've continued. It's been like a freight train coming. It's still chugging along there. And so this was their first attempt to say, hey, here's some research that we've done on some of the banks that are more heavily reliant on overdraft fees. And you're going to see that this gets updated a couple different times throughout the year. So this is their first blast of that information related to research on those that are reliant more heavily on overdraft income. Number two, or page number 2, number 6 at the bottom, rapid response. What they're trying to do is tell our industry, FinCEN, how all of these various organizations, we've got the US Postal Service, Homeland Security, and you can see it's kind of in the top of that paragraph, how they get together and work quickly when there's something, especially cyber-related, going on, to exchange information with how fast money can be stolen by way of some of these cyber crimes and so on and so forth. So this is a fact sheet, kind of interesting if you haven't taken a look at it, at how these entities work together to combat illegal crime, terrorist financing, those sort of things. Page number 3, number 7 at the top. This is a CFPB fact sheet regarding the qualified mortgage rule. Really, this has to do with calculating prepaid interest on certain types of adjustable rate mortgages. So if that's a type of product that you offer, you want to make sure relative to the QM calculations and those per day or prepaid interest calculations that you're following the guidance that's been put out there. Number 8 talks about the unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. Another thing you're going to continually hear information about as we go through the program today. This has to do with repossessions. And so it talks about loan holders and servicers being held accountable for practices related to repossession that might be unfair, deceptive, or abusive. So it's really a warning shot to those that are doing repossessions. And that's likely everyone listening. If you know, whether it's directly you or you're going through a third party, you're going to be responsible for what that third party does relative to practices that may be unfair, deceptive, or abusive. Number 9 talks about Russian sanctions. And so this is a FinCEN statement. Really, it's some red flags that they put out to help banks like yours identify situations that may be subject to the Russian sanctions that have been put out there by our government. And so it talks about activity. Again, red flags, make sure you're aware of those. You pass them on to those that have responsibilities in those areas within your financial institution. Number 10, top of page number 4. So this is a White House executive order. And before we went live today, Diane and I were talking about this. We've seen a lot more of these. Not that maybe they weren't there before, but there's a lot more compliance-related White House executive orders. This one happens to be about digital assets, cryptocurrency, things like that. There's a lot of challenges that we face as an industry in that area. And so the White House, in collaboration with the regulatory agencies, are working to try to reduce risks in those areas, which likely means we're inviting reform and regulation to the table, because there's very little out there right now with digital assets. But in order to provide some reduction in risk, that's likely where things are going. So stay tuned on that one. You're going to probably hear more about digital currency, both from the BSA AML perspective and just plain old regulatory reform perspective as we go down the road. The next two kind of go together. So we've got number 11, which is a CFPB supervisory change, is how it was announced. And it has to do with discrimination, but it has to do with UDAAP as well. And so they're talking about illegal discrimination, which is identified within the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, but they're trying to apply it in non-lending spaces. And so what they're doing here is they're explaining to our industry, hey, we're going to borrow the protected characteristics from ECOA, and we're going to apply them in non-lending related situations, and we're going to call it unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. And then number 12 is coming along and saying, all right, in order to do this, we have to update our exam manual, and we are now going to include within the scope of unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices illegal discrimination by way of ECOA, but not necessarily to lending-related activities. Now, the one thing they do say in number 12 is that if they do identify a lending-related activity that has illegal discrimination tied to it, they may also tag along unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. So I wrote down next to number 12, this could be a double whammy, but this also furthers their initiative to create a fair marketplace that they have been behind pushing since day one in their existence. And so this isn't news necessarily that should surprise anyone. How they're going about it is a little interesting. It's not through the normal rulemaking and advanced notification practices. They're trying to drive some of this by way of updating their examination manuals, pushing out something from their newsroom, which, my opinion, is not the way to do it. And there are a lot of others, just like our company, that are saying the same thing. But at the same time, we can't ignore it either, because there are enforcement actions out there relative to UDAAP that are being made. And we want to make sure you don't fall into one of those traps as well. We'll hear more about that as we continue to move through this. Let's go to page number 5, number 13 at the top. HMDA data from 2021 was released. This was early this year. I always bring this one in and simply say, you need to make sure you've reviewed your data. Know what it says about you and what it doesn't say about you, and make sure management and the board have a 10,000-foot summary. The idea is no surprises. We don't want to be surprised by something that somebody has taken our data and written about us. It's publicly available to anyone these days, and they no longer have to come and ask you for it. So you don't know when or where it's going to occur. You just need to be prepared for it if and when it does. That means you have to do some homework, study your data. What does it say? What doesn't it say about what you do relative to your practices? Number 14 is FDIC supervisory highlights. And you're going to see a couple different highlights like this come throughout today's program. The number one thing is, what can you learn from the mistakes of others? It might not be you today that's part of these highlights, but it could be tomorrow. And so we want to make sure that if somebody else made a mistake, that we identify what's gone on, and we make sure it's not happening in our own backyard, because we don't want it to be us tomorrow relative to what's been identified. And it could be us tomorrow that shows up in one of these highlights because they've come in and reviewed us and it's something brand new. And so we always want to be learning from the mistakes of others along the way. The different things that are highlighted here, Reg E, a lot of discussion on P2P, or I'm sorry, not P2P. Yeah, P2P. I guess they call it money payment platforms. So think Venmo, Cash App, Apple Pay, PayPal, those types of companies relative to disputes. A whole lot more fraud and criminal activity going on out there these days. Unfortunately, the CFPB put out some Q&As late 2021 that said, hey, if they come to you, it's your problem. You have to deal with it, and it's subject to Reg E. They also told that to these MPPP platforms, more money payment platforms, getting confused with the Mortgage Portfolio Protection Program and flood and the whole PPP loan thing. Too much of that going on. Anyway, this is those money payment platforms. Again, we'd like for those platforms to deal with the customer when they come to them, but the regulators have spoken and said, if they come to you, you got to deal with it too. And we all know what's going on. They're going to the platform, and the platform saying, go talk to your bank. And then you're stuck having to resolve the issue. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't resolve you from having to do it and having to work through it. Overdraft limits. This was a interesting one, changing the limits. So a lot of overdraft programs have a dollar amount, cushion, if you will. This says if you change how you do that, you need to make sure you provide information so consumers can make informed decisions moving forward. This is explained that there were banks that just made the switch without providing information to the consumer to make an informed decision, and that's not okay. And then the last one we're going to hear more about later, multiple representments and NSF charges. And I'll just kind of leave that here. There's a bigger thing coming later. Let's go to page number 6. I mentioned appraisals. You're going to hear more about it. This is the big task force, the PAVE action plan. PAVE stands for Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. This is the regulatory agencies collectively, along with the White House, saying we need to reform the industry. Hey, there's illegal discrimination going on. There's a lack of equity and equality associated with the appraisal industry, and so it's all up in the air, and we are going to revamp it. You're going to continue to hear a lot more about this, all in the name of trying to root out illegal discrimination associated with valuations, appraisals, etc. Number 16, the AML Act of 2020. You know, when 2021 started off a year ago, or 2021, 2 years ago almost now, we were expecting big things and fast and big projects, and they just quite haven't happened the way we thought they would. Part of that was COVID and things like that. This is just the FinCEN saying, hey, we're behind. We acknowledge we've had lots of delays. We're working through it. These things are still going to happen, but not necessarily on the original timeline. And so stay tuned. There'll be more to come. So it's not like it's dead and gone away. It's just not going to happen on what the original time frame that they thought it would. Let's go to page 6, number 17. This is another one of those supervisory highlights. This happens to be the CFPB's version. Just again, what can we learn from other people's mistakes? You may not be supervised by the CFPB directly, but if I was the compliance officer in your bank, I'd be reading these to make sure we're not getting into trouble doing the same things. I'd read the OCCs, I'd read the FDICs, and whoever I am regulated by, I'd read that as well. Collectively, it's going to help us keep moving in the right direction and keep out of trouble and steer clear. Let's go to page 7. Number 18, CRA proposal. So there was a CRA proposal. It was an interagency. Now it's limited to the OCC, the Federal Reserve, and the FDIC. So they've issued a proposal. There will be a final rule coming. We expect it sometime in 2023. Doesn't mean we couldn't get it sooner than that, but we expect it the earlier part of 2023. This will be a big project. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to looking at what's up around the corner as we look ahead at 2023, but the proposal's out, the final rule's coming, and that'll be a big implementation project. They're revamping the CRA rules along the way. Number 19, the CFPB once a year puts out their annual fair lending report. Our team reads through that. Some years are better than others with the information that we're able to pull out of that. This one, not a lot. I mean, a lot of information, but what caught our attention in that third paragraph down, they use the word technology. That's really been a focus from a fair lending standpoint, looking forward. Not that they're doing plenty of things right now with the way things are currently happening, no question. But one of the big concerns as we look down the road is the use of technology, artificial intelligence, things like that, and the idea that you're not going to root out bias just because something is electronic or that we've used technology. We have to make sure we fully vet this technology, these systems, these programs to ensure there's not illegal discrimination that is intertwined within the makeup and delivery of credit decisions and the process along the way. So was our big takeaway from this report. Otherwise, there was mostly not huge noteworthy items within. Number 20, the CFPB put out an advisory opinion. Once in a while they do that, in addition to the other 1,000 ways they deliver information. They put out an advisory opinion on Regulation B, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Someone had asked about whether or not an applicant was still an applicant after you made a decision to make them a loan relative to adverse action notices. And they were trying to not give an adverse action notice to an existing customer to which they had taken adverse action. The CFPB chimed in and said, no, it's our opinion and the long-standing opinion that an applicant doesn't cease being an applicant once you've made them a loan. Once the loan is being serviced, they are still an applicant if you take adverse action against them, and therefore you have to provide an adverse action notice accordingly. And so that's the advisory opinion that's number 20. Number 21, after what seemed like a long time waiting coming for this, the regulatory agencies, Interagency, put out the final version of the revamped flood insurance FAQs. Now, these are not 144 new FAQs. There are a lot of them that stayed exactly the same. There are some that were reworded, and there's a few new ones sprinkled in. There is a lot of great information there, and I'm not going to get any deeper than that in today's program. That's something you're hungry for. We did a 2-hour webinar where we covered every single one of those that you can go check out in our library. But there is a lot of good information there. Again, not all of it's new, though. Hey, much of it's just rewording, small revisions. There are a few new things sprinkled in, though. Number 22, CFPB Circulars. So this is new. So in May, they come out with a new way to talk to your regulator. So these circulars aren't written to you, but you absolutely should be reviewing them. These are written to your regulator about what the CFPB is doing to oversee regulatory compliance. And so if they've caught something, they want to let your regulator know that they've caught something, that they should be looking for the same thing. The idea here is to get them all singing from the same sheet of music. So I like the idea. It's another way for them to push regulation, push compliance or their agenda without having to go through the normal rulemaking hoops of advance notices and proposals, and then followed by comment periods and final rules and things like that. And so we need to pay attention to these. That's the short version. Number 23, their first circular was deceptive use of the FDIC symbol and statement regarding FDIC insurance. and not so much by banks, but by non-banks relative to things like digital assets and things like that. And so they put out this circular to say, hey, other regulatory agencies, be on the look for this. If you flip to page, well, actually, there's more of this coming. It's a little further down the road, but you're going to see the FDIC a little bit later puts out a final rule to address this. And I'll swing back to that in a moment. Page number 9, the next circular that they put out has to do with adverse action notices based on those of you that may be using a more complex model or AI or algorithm to make credit decisions. There are some out there doing that today. That's not wrong to embrace technology. You need to do your due diligence, but you also need to follow existing rules like providing adverse action notices. So even though you have a complicated way, by way of technology, of arriving at a credit decision, that doesn't absolve you from providing an adverse action notice. And that's the reminder in 24, as well as number 25. So 24 is the circular from the CFPB to your regulatory agency. 25 is the newsroom public notice to everyone, both consumer and industry side of the fence. Number 26, direct disputes. So I included this one to more kind of go off on a tangent and say, if somebody comes to you with a dispute about credit reporting information that you've reported about them, you don't get to say, go take it up with the credit bureau. That's a direct dispute. The Fair Credit Reporting Act says you have to have a policy and you have to have procedures in which you follow to take care of that direct dispute. The reason, again, I bring it to you is number one, it was something the CFPB put out in a blog. When they write something, we should listen to what they're saying. Number two, this is a good reminder to make sure we're following our policy and procedures. One of the number one complaints that the CFPB is credit reports and the information contained within them relative to accuracy. So let's make sure we're doing our part relative to the rules that we're supposed to be following when it comes to information that may not be as accurate as it should be. Number 27, this is the SCRA notice, so Servicemember Civil Relief Act. This has been a while coming too. We've been relying on an expired notice for some time now. They have updated that notice. So you'll see up on the screen there, we've got the red circle. The new expiration date on the notice, even though we were relying on an expired one for quite some time, should now be November 30th, 2024. If you haven't updated that, make sure you do so sooner than later. Page number 10, number 28, here's that FDIC name and logo final rule. So the CFPB put out a circular saying, hey, there are non-banks using FDIC symbols and language, and they're being deceptive about it where it doesn't apply, things like that. The FDIC put out a final rule saying, hey, here's a rule that says how you can go about having identified one of these and who to tell about it. And so you'll find that kind of in the last part of that paragraph. If you identify misuse, there's a path for you to get a hold of the FDIC and let them know what you've observed. I wrote down next to number 28, see number 23. So 23 and 28 do kind of go together here. Number 29, those of you that are lucky enough to be Home Mortgage Disclosure Act reporters, so HMDA, the CFPB put out a beginner's guide to using and slicing and dicing your data. So I said earlier that when the data drops, you've got to make sure you study it. Know what it says, what it doesn't say, be prepared so there's no surprises. That was extremely important because the CFPB is pushing others, not banks, to take a look at data about banks and come to their own conclusions about what that data may or may not say about that bank, financial institution, credit union, whatever. And so they're encouraging the use of that HMDA data for whatever. Make sure you understand those tools as well, and that you, again, understand what your data may say or not say about you. Again, no surprises along the way. Number 30, initiative to improve customer service. So this was a CFPB newsroom item, really scaled to larger banks, but I think there's something for everybody to take away here. That customer service is something that, is, in certain circumstances, it's kind of a lost thing. In the last couple of years with COVID and the pandemic and everything, that let's make sure that we brush up on those skills. It really, when we're in business, it's about relationships, it's about the people. And so I think there's something for everybody to take away here in brushing up on, how could we take our customer service experience and move from good to great to excellent, if you will. So this was written for big banks, but I think there's something here for everyone to take something away with. Number 31, top of page 11. Oh, this one bothers me. So elder abuse exploitation is getting worse and worse and worse. The aging are being taken advantage of. And so the FinCEN put out an advisory to remind people about the trend in the increasing of taking advantage of elders relative to financial abuse. And also they included some red flags and some examples along the way here. So just make sure that those of you or those that are dealing with people on the front line are familiar with the red flags, with the trend, unfortunately, increasing in elder abuse and financial exploitation. Number 32, let's go there next. On number 32, we have, again, overdraft program data collection. So I mentioned that there was a chart at the beginning of the program. That's not this. This is a different data collection. So in addition to that, they're also looking for information about overdraft programs, non-sufficient funds processes along the way. And there's a questionnaire that they put together that you'll get to by way of that link. If you're approaching an exam and want to know, what are we likely to be asked about when it comes to our overdraft programs, this would be a good start. Now, this is the CFPB's, but your regulatory agency is likely asking some of the same questions. And I'm going to guess if the FDIC's particular, they have been asking for years now. But this is something the CFPB put out. Again, it helps to know the test questions before you take the test, right? Let's go to number 33 next. So this is an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So they haven't even done a proposal yet. This is seeking information relative to credit card late fees and late payments. They're soliciting information from customers, the financial institution, regulators. They want to gather information to help them put together a rule down the road. Okay, so we're not there yet as far as the rulemaking, but this is them collecting data and information along the way. Let's go to page 12, number 34. So the title is Independent ATM Operators and Owners, so automated teller machines. This is a FinCEN statement. So the idea that we have, and it used to be privately owned ATMs, they changed it to independent ATM owners. I don't know why, but they did. But the idea is we had a lot of banks that said, oh, gosh, that seems really risky because I could sell drugs out of the back of my whatever store and then take the cash and load my privately owned ATM, and that's how I launder and clean the money. Well, it's probably not that simple, but it got a lot of banks concerned. And so banks would say, oh, we're not going to bank privately owned ATM customers. This is a reminder to banks that you shouldn't just take all customers of the same type, in this particular instance, private or independent ATM owners, and say, hey, they're all risky, we're not going to bank them. In fact, there's another thing coming. Put down next to 34, C37. Number 34 is specific to privately owned ATMs. Number 37 is going to be about just customers and customer due diligence in general, that we shouldn't just be taking a class of customer and saying, nope, we're not going to bank them because of who they are or the industry that they're in. Now, they can't stop you from doing that. Okay? MSBs were the subject of the same discussion several years back, but they're encouraging you that they do have a place within our country, within our business model. Number 35, this is just the CFPB's spring 22 agenda. We are thinking that the fall version of the agenda is right around the corner, so stay tuned for that. The spring 2022 version did not have a lot on it, yet they've been very busy, as you can see, as we've walked through the year so far, and there's even more to come in our book here. So while the agenda looks thin, that's just with the rulemaking authority that they're using. They're pushing a lot of authority by way of these blogs and press releases and circulars and enforcement actions that we've read about throughout the year. So it's not always by way of the traditional methods that they are pushing their initiatives and agendas. Let's go to page number 13. Number 36 is Servicemember Complaints. So annually, the CFPB puts out a service member report. This one highlighted credit reporting and debt collections as the top complaints within our industry relative to service members. So make sure you've brushed up on your service member customer service and that you're reviewing your complaints within your complaint program for anything where we might be able to do better when it comes to service members and potential negative interactions that they may have had with us. Let's go to number 37 next. This is that risk-based CDD. So we talked about just privately owned ATMs or independent ATM owners earlier. This is just more general across the board. Make sure you don't have procedures in place that just kick a certain class of customer or type of customer to the curb because of who they are. There is a place for them. They may have an elevated risk factor, but they're not all situated the same way. And so, again, they can't stop you from doing that, but this is a warning that they'd like you not to go there. Number 38, permissible purposes. So we're back to the Fair Credit Reporting Act here. So this gets into permissible purposes listed in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And the reason I'm covering this one is not so much what it specifically is about, but again, with all the emphasis and focus on credit reports, integrity, use and misuse of credit report information, I just thought a good place for us to be reminded that when you order a credit report, it's for that particular purpose, not for some future purpose, not for some previous purchase or purpose. It's got to be for that particular purpose. And the Fair Credit Reporting Act says you're certifying that when you order a credit report from the credit reporting agency. And so it is only to be used for that particular purpose. And if you don't have a legitimate business purpose, you shouldn't be obtaining a credit report in the first place. And again, there's more to that. This is merely a reminder using some information that the CFPB has put out by way of an interpretive rule. Let's go to number 39. We're back to our overdrafts. This is that update. So this is the update to number 5. So number 5, earlier they introduced this chart that said, here's what some of the top 20 banks have done when it comes to overdrafts and NSF charges and practices. This is a link to an updated version of that. And so this one goes through 2022. So the picture is not updated on the screen. But if you were to go to that link, the previous one, number 5, only went through September of 2021. This link here is going to go through at least the first quarter of 2022, if not further, if they've updated it since then. Again, you can see what others are doing to change their game up relative to overdrafts and overdraft practices. If you haven't captured it or haven't been to one of our other programs where we've tackled overdrafts, there is reform lying right up there on the horizon. I don't know how it's going to happen. Is it going to be an act of Congress that brings a new law and thus regulation? Or is it going to come in the form of guidance? Or is it going to be with enforcement actions? Or all of the above? But the point or the takeaway is there is going to be change of some sort, and it's already really occurring because you can see by way of some of these charts what some of the other banks have done along the way. Now, speaking of that, I mentioned reform by way of lawmaking. There's 2 different bills in Congress right now, and there have been bills since all the way back to 2009. Most of them haven't gone anywhere. But this particular one, HR 4277, has went further than any of the other ones prior. It has been approved in a House Financial Services Committee. Now, that's not the full House, but it's gotten further than any of the others. It's restrictive, but the Senate version is even more restrictive. Point and takeaway here is there's a lot of juice behind overdraft reform, and Congress is talking about it more than they have ever done in the last 10 plus years. Stay tuned. You're likely to hear more on that down the road. Let's go to page 15, number 41. The FDIC kind of slipped this one, underneath everyone. They, in early August, updated their fair housing poster, the address or the name associated with the address that we put on the fair housing poster. So the address stayed the same, but the name of the place changed. And so the Federal Register was put out, and the industry didn't really catch it until later. And so we started asking, what do we got to do? And because vendors started calling banks like yours, trying to sell you updated versions of posters, telling you needed new adverse action notices with this new name. Well, we contacted the FDIC. Now, it took us a while to get through to them, about 3 different phone calls. And they finally said, yes, we're aware this was an update. We will be putting out information. Don't do anything yet. We'll be putting out information on where and how to get updated posters and what they should read. So you don't need to do anything just yet. And so when that information comes out, if you get our blog, we'll let you know. Stay tuned. There's more to come there. Number 42, digital marketing provider. To me, this is a big warning shot. That's what I wrote down next to number 42. This was written by the CFPB, and I'm sure other regulators have taken note as well, that if you're engaged with a third party to help you with your marketing efforts, hey, number 1, they're fair game for your regulator to go directly to them if they're doing things on your behalf. It's also fair game for you to go to them and say, I need to know how you're doling out our products and services to the world, whether it's through some platform, some social media site, whatever it may be. It's all fair game. They're not going to be able to tell you anymore that it's proprietary and confidential, because that's not going to fly with you, and it's not going to fly with your regulator, and it shouldn't fly with you either. You need to be able to do that due diligence to make sure that we haven't crossed over the lines with something that's unfair, deceptive, abusive, or illegal discrimination by way of Regulation B or the Fair Housing Act. Number 43, UDAAP and sensitive information. This is a circular the CFPB put out to other regulatory agencies to say, hey, if there's inadequate security and sensitive information has gotten out about customers, while that might be a privacy or a Gramm-Leach-Bliley thing, it may also be a UDAAP thing. So now you've heard this UDAAP card get played over and over. This is also going to be one of our things that we put on your radar looking forward. The CFPB, how are they pushing their agenda? Not with new rulemaking. They're taking things they don't like and they're applying UDAAP, unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. Why? It's easy. They don't have to go through a proposal, an advance notice of proposal rulemaking, comment letters, and then a final rule. They can simply say, we got to check some boxes here and we think it can meet unfair, deceptive, or abusive. Now, that's not totally easy to do that, but it's easier than going through the rulemaking stage. At least that's the perception they're giving to our industry. Let's go to number 44. I can't believe how much we've talked about this one in the last year. Now, the note here is that this is the FDIC financial institution letter, but this is not just FDIC banks. The FDIC has taken the aggressive approach to deal with this. This goes back to 2019. There have been class action lawsuits, every year since 2019 for sure, where banks have been sued because their disclosures don't explain that when an item is presented more than once, there could be a fee each time it's presented. The class action lawsuits generally lead to settlements. There have been a couple banks that have won, not necessarily most recently, but there have been a few. But the FDIC took a different approach. They said, hey, if you're doing this, it's an unfair, deceptive, or abusive act or practice. Okay, we're going to stake our claim to that. The expectation is that you do research and a look back through a footnote. They expect that to be 2 years, and that's what we're hearing from the industry as well. Anything less than that is something you likely have to be running by your regulator. And then once you've identified who's been affected by this, full restitution. If you don't do the look back to their liking and provide full restitution, their threat is enforcement action. And the threat is not an empty one. We've seen it in examination reports. Now, what about the OCC and the Federal Reserve and the other regulatory agencies? I'm told that it's also an issue in those areas. I don't have a financial institution letter to back it up. I don't have anything public I can pass along. But there's also the risk of civil liability in going to court. So there is quite a bit of steam behind this. The good news is the amount of the refund here is it's not as big as some other things that we've seen in the past through history. It still stinks to have to write a check to do reimbursement, but once you identify how many, it's probably less than you think it is. Now, for some of you, that's still probably a pretty big number. I get it. Let's go to page 16. The very top, number 45, the CFPB put out some technical readiness sessions. We attended one of these. Not a lot to see here. You didn't miss anything. Know that there will be some things you'll need to do to get ready for 1071 as we continue to move along here. And we'll look at this when we start to look at what's ahead in 2022, 2023 as we flip over. Number 46, another HMDA tool that they put out about your data. Again, it's good to know what tools are out there for the public to utilize to access your data to see what the data says about how you're doing things. Number 47, the OCC has this thing called the MLR. It's the money laundering risk tool that they use. They're updating it. And so they put out a comment, a request for comment on their potential updates to this tool. It's only for OCC banks to capture data to help them do risk-based examinations from a BSA AML perspective. Number 48, this has the potential to be a big deal for some. So back in July of 2020, there were approximately 1,700 banks across the country that got out of HMDA because they increased the threshold from 25 in each of the prior 2 calendar years to 100 in each of the prior 2 calendar years. And we're talking about originations. So a bunch of you had a big party and like, hey, we don't have to do HMDA anymore, right? And you've just been brought back to reality. There was a judge in Washington, D.C. that in September, number 48 on page 16, ruled that the rule change back in 2020 was to be invalidated or vacated. And so we're waiting for the CFPB to say something about this. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, the CFPB, they're going to appeal. No, they're not. This is exactly what they want. They want more data. And so they're loving, at least this leadership group at the CFPB, that this judge said, hey, that was wrong. They shouldn't have done that. It was illegal. And therefore, all of you that got out, you're now going to be back in. The question is, when are you back in? My hunch is that you're not going to have to do anything with the data since July of 2020 through the end of this year. My hunch, okay, my crystal ball. However, you need to start preparing. I don't know if January 1st is going to be the go date, but it might be. And you want to be prepared when we get there. So you could be somebody that hasn't had to do HMDA and you're looking at having to do it again because they're lowering that threshold back down to 25. In other words, making it like it never happened. Okay? And so you're going to hear more of that. If that's one of you, it's unfortunate. I'm sorry that's happened to you, but I've had discussions with several in the last 2 weeks on this. It's best to start preparing. And that way, if you get more time, that's great. And if you have to start January 1st, you'll be ready to go. We've got lots of training out there. We can provide consultation to help you out. Give us a phone. We're taking those calls almost daily right now from banks just like yours. Let's go to page 17, number 49. I really bring this to your attention to say this isn't about you. There is a company beneficial ownership rule that has been doled out to entities. Okay? Nothing has changed with the bank, the financial institution. There may be changes down the road, but there's nothing that's changing in your world yet with beneficial owners. But your customers may have to begin doing something on their side of the transaction or their side of the company, if you will. Number 50, the OCC put out its 2023 Supervision Plan. You're OCC regulated, you should be taking advantage of reading what their priorities are going to be. UDAAP, fair lending, and BSA AML. And again, there's more to it than that if you go read up on it, but those are their primary things from a regulatory compliance standpoint. UDAAP, fair lending, and BSA AML. The general QM mandatory compliance date was October 1st, 2022. This is truth in lending. Many of you, this is a non-issue because if you do secondary market lending, July of 2021, the secondary market already said we're going to do it earlier than this date. So this date's really only going to come into play if you were doing in-house QMs of the general QM variety. It now needs to follow the new general QM because the old version died off on October 1st, as did the patch or temporary QM that the secondary market used prior to July 1 of 2020. So that was the 10-1 ATR QM date. All right, number 52, top of page number 18, reconsider evaluation process. So this looks like a regulatory requirement. It's not necessarily a regulatory requirement on the surface, although if you peel back the layers, we can have a fair lending issue here. If somebody asks for the value to be reconsidered by way of an appraisal or evaluation, okay, that's the customer's right to ask you. They can ask you that. You don't necessarily have to do something, but if it is something that is fair lending related, that should get your attention. And then you should be making any process you allow for this to happen by way of to be consistent from one applicant to the next, to make sure we're not discriminating based on any illegal characteristics as outlined in Reg B. So it's not a regulatory requirement, but it becomes a fair lending issue if you're not consistent in the application of it. Number 53, short and sweet, Reg Z, we've got a couple updated thresholds for 2023. You're going to hear a lot more between now and the end of the year. There's several things in the regulations that update thresholds. Here's kind of the start of that. Now that's where the published version of of the look back ends. I've got one more. Unless you've been on vacation and not reading anything, you know that the CFPB last week put out kind of their next in line of the junk fee initiative that they started earlier this year and that we started at the beginning of the day here today with. Two things by way of the guidance they put out last week. Number one, surprise overdraft fees. And this one shouldn't be a surprise. I know they say surprise, so it's like, oh my gosh, we should be surprised about it. I wrote down, this goes back to 2016. This is authorized positive, settles negative electronic funds transfers, and overdraft fees. Now, this should only be something that's applicable to those of you that have a Reg E opt-in, because that's the only time you can charge an overdraft for those types of transactions. But when I go and my card is approved against a positive balance, but then it later posts to my account against a negative balance, and you charge me because I've opted in, they're saying that that's a surprise overdraft fee and therefore illegal under UDAAP. They've been saying this since back to 2016. So if you've been paying attention to any overdraft program we've presented or that others have presented, they likely have talked about this. It's become more mainstream because of the Regions Bank enforcement action, $200 million almost in fines and restitution. And now we've got some official regulatory stuff that's been sent out by way of a circular saying, hey, other regulatory agencies, this is a big deal. But they were already saying it was a big deal. Okay, we're probably going to see more consistent enforcement actions here. What's the path for this? We'll look back to the NSF representment thing. There's going to probably have to be a look back, probably restitution, and that's how you avoid the enforcement action. It doesn't do away with the violation or the harm that has happened. And the look back period, we get questions about that all the time. Well, the UDAAP has a 5-year look back period, so that they're only potentially looking at 2 in certain circumstances or something less than that. Consider yourself lucky because it could be much bigger. So that was the surprise overdraft fee side of it. The other side of it, this is the one that surprised me, returned item fees. Now, we all probably have those. I kind of get this one. The customer doesn't have any control. If I deposit a check into my account that I think's good, why do I get charged for that? So I do kind of see their angle here, but all this is stuff that's been going on for a long time, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. We live in a different world. We got different people overseeing things. UDAAP's being used aggressively. Okay, more aggressively than it's ever been used in the past. I know that's tough to have those explanations and discussions with management because they're going, what changed? Nothing. Well, why is this a problem? New sheriff in town, new leadership, and the world's different than the way it was back when, this stuff was probably not something that was discussed in everyday compliance circles. So that's something you need to make sure you've read up on. You're going to continue to likely hear more on that. That is 2022 so far. Let's take a quick glimpse into 2023 as we approach the rest of 22 and flip the calendar over here. The regulatory agenda from the CFPB standpoint, that's going to drop sooner than later. It has likely to be very thin like the last couple have been. My guess is they're going to continue to push the UDAAP agenda, unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practice, and regulation by enforcement actions. So I would say UDAAP and non-traditional regulatory rulemaking is really what their continued practice looks to likely be. You're going to hear continued emphasis on fair lending. That's not going to go away. That was an initiative set by not just the CFPB, but all the regulatory agencies at the end of 2021. It's continued through 22 and will continue on and likely never go away. That's something that's going to be a continued push. So make sure you've got the correct resources that you're throwing at that. There's the Reg B small business lending data collection rule. That's going to be supposedly to us by the end of March. That is a huge project and is going to put the magnifying glass on commercial lending and fair lending. Not that fair lending is not something that should be dealt with in that space. It's been there all along, but it's going to put the magnifying glass on it. We're going to learn a lot, and there's going to be some things that get exposed in large and small banks alike as it relates to that, whether it's your adverse action notice practices, your application processes, things like that just in teaching this over the last year, the proposal, that there's some things that are going to boil to the top. There's a great opportunity for you to take and show how your CMS works by putting together an action plan and an implementation plan to carry out this big project and get it moving and ultimately completed in a timely format. The CRA Final Rulemaking is going to come along the same way. Another big project for those of you that are FDIC, OCC, and Federal Reserve regulated. And so another big rule for you to handle as we look into the horizon. FinCEN BSA AML, yeah, there's been some delays, so please stand by. They're working, but it's going to come, and those are bigger projects as well. So there's plenty to do. There's plenty of job security for us in the compliance industry. There'll be no shortage of things to do as the calendar moves forward. Overdraft evolution and rulemaking. Yeah, there's something coming. There's too big of a push here to not have something. Will it be new laws by way of acts of Congress? Will it be pushing the industry to modify itself by enforcement actions and newsroom publications and blogs? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. But the path is to less dollars in your pocket from a financial institution standpoint than what you've received in the past. Your overdraft income is going to be less. Make sure management and the board understand that and are planning accordingly as we move down the road. The HMDA closed-end reporting threshold, I covered that earlier. 1,700 of you, you got out. You're going to be back in. Now, maybe some of you don't qualify, but many of you are going to be back in. Is it January 1st? It could be. I think you should plan for that. You may get more time. But I think to sit back and hope that it's going to go away, that's not going to happen. The CFPB leadership this is exactly what they want. I don't plan that they will appeal this at all. And then the last item here before I invite Diane in to take some questions is, this is a picture we use when we teach CMS, Compliance Management Systems. It's our house of compliance. Everybody should have a house that has these, this framework, if you will. And so my takeaway or question for you all is, is your house of compliance in order? And do you have to do any home improvements? Do you have anything that's maybe a little weak that you need to improve upon? What types of ways can you position yourself to be better as you move forward to ensure that your house of compliance is as strong as it should be to manage what's coming down the pike and what has come down in the last 9 months or so? With that, I'm going to have Diane come on in. Diane's my teammate. She does a lot of the study and the research that for the programs that we put on here today. She makes me look a lot better than I am, sound a lot better than I am. And so I'm going to turn things over to her. And we're going to take a few of your questions and try to provide some plain English answers here before we close up shop at the top of the hour. So, Diane, the floor is yours.
Okay, first off, what are your thoughts on the overnight shift when it comes to the ability to charge for transactions that authorize positive but settle negative? And do you see the CFPB being challenged on this in court?
Okay, so in that question, we're reading these verbatim as you bring them in, right? The overnight shift. I'm going to remind you, there wasn't an overnight shift. It was not an overnight shift here. I actually looked this up ahead of the program here as I was studying this. The Federal Reserve, with other regulatory agencies, not the CFPB necessarily, back in 2016, they first called this out in a thing called the Consumer Compliance Outlook Live. It's a free webinar that they do periodically. This one happened to be on overdrafts. And they said, yeah, this is an unfair practice. The FDIC called it out again in 2019. What we're seeing now is that the CFPB just made a really big example out of Regions Bank to the tune of $200 million and have now put out some information, newsroom and circulars, to try to get everybody on the same page and identify this moving forward. So it's not overnight. I think the approved positives or the authorized positive settles negative is something that sticks. Again, not new. I don't think that there's going to be much. I mean, there may be some pushback. I don't think we're going to win. The returned item fee, that one surprised me. I struggle with that one. So stay tuned on that. That's really, really new, like last week. We're still noodling on that one as well.
Number 24 at the top of page 9 was on the complex algorithms. And somebody is asking, does this include automated underwriting systems?
Absolutely. Now, it might be on the more historic scale or spectrum of the scale when it comes to technology and underwriting. But absolutely, any sort of automated underwriting system needs to be vetted for any sort of bias that may have been created or created as a result of the ongoing use of the program. A lot of this AI stuff, okay, it builds on what it knows over time, right? I mean, you've seen the movies, it's scary stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff they're worried about. Maybe it's not biased today, but based on what it learns as you feed it information, it might become biased. That's the concern.
For fair housing posters, can we create our own as long as they meet the size and font requirements?
What a stupid poster. 11 by 14. Who's got that paper sitting around, right? So, yes, if you create your own, you can update it with the new name. And I don't know the name off the top of my head, but you could theoretically do that. What I wouldn't do is go pay a vendor to do it for me unless you got like super nice stuff, because the FDIC will give these out for free.
And a related question, if we have already updated our poster, do you feel it would be considered wrong in the eyes of examiners?
You should get extra credit in your next exam. No, it's not wrong. If you were out there and doing it ahead of time, good for you.
Do you have any good recommendations on how to let applicants challenge their appraisal value while maintaining appraisal independence? And do we limit the things that can be challenged on an appraisal?
You know, I struggle with this, right? Because we have Reg Z appraisal independence rules, we have safety and soundness rules, and now we've got these task forces, and we've got the CFPB saying, well, it's not a by itself, it's not a law that you have to allow them to reconsider. But if they're asking to reconsider because of something that's illegal discrimination, then you should be paying attention, right? And so that's kind of my thing. If they're challenging the value just to challenge the value, and it has nothing to do with some sort of illegal discrimination or protected class or characteristics, I'm not going to sweat that as much. But if somebody's trying to claim that something's been undervalued, or that I've been the property by way of the applicant or where it's located is being treated differently because of a protected characteristic in ECOA, then we have a problem. My big thing is make sure you're doing whatever you're doing consistently. If you let me get away with asking for something and pushing your button so that we can get a different evaluation or something updated, but you don't let Diane do the same thing, well, she's female. She's a protected class. You can't do that. You've treated her differently. So everybody needs to be treated the same.
You mentioned a risk assessment as part of the House of Compliance. This individual is wondering, is there a good source for a basic risk assessment of all regulations? And would you recommend assessing risk by category, or such as by product or by regulation?
Oh, wow, there's a lot there. So I'm going to take you to page 20. Part of the House of Compliance is risk assessments, and you likely have several within your organization, right? Is there a good, template? Is there a good place to go to say, yeah, we just got to put our name on this and fill in our stuff? No, there's not. They're not a one size fits all. When it comes to risk assessments, yours is unique. It's like DNA. There's nobody else that's going to look, walk, and talk the same way you do. Now, there's certain things that we can pull into the risk assessment as far as like headlines and things like that and sections. But no, I don't have a template that says, this is the one you should be using.
Looks like we're at the top of the hour.
You know what? Wow, time flies when you're having fun. I tell you what, folks, before you go off here, we're going to respect your time here today and keep this to an hour. We know you've got customers to get back to and deals to get back to here. Before you go, let me do this. First off, thank you for stopping by today. We had a record crowd. I want to say we approached 800 different people, and that's awesome today. I want to just give a heads up. We are doing a lending Q&A forum January 24th, and you can begin submitting questions. So today we only got to about 10 minutes of questions. The next 3 forums, the whole hour is questions. And if you were lucky enough to be one of the people that subscribed and came to our compliance conference, the lending one we did just a little over a week ago, we did 2 hours of Q&A at the end of that conference. And Kevin, my teammate's going to be doing the same thing at the end of the BSA AML one. So we got lots of different ways we can get to your questions. These upcoming forums, it'll be 1 hour, all Q&A, as many as we can get to during that time frame. So we'd love to have you get that bookmarked and save that time in your calendar. In closing, I want to thank our team for making this thing happen today. We got a lot of people working behind the scenes and teammates that weren't able to be here that really helped with the research and bringing all the information to all of you, doing the research in the field, in the trenches, through those reviews, and Diane for helping me out with the questions today. Thank you. What we're going to do is put a short survey out there. We'd love to hear from you. 5 short questions, take you less than a minute. It may help us move from good to great and bring you the next one of these. So if you do that, that would really help us out. The recording, we're going to make that available to you as soon as we can. When it is available, you'll receive a message on where and when you can go download that. We'd love it if you'd rate today's program like you did a Google purchase or a Amazon purchase or something else like that out there. It helps people when they're shopping in our store. With that, I want to respect the hour time frame. We're ready to let you get back to doing what you all do so well, and that's serving your customers. Thanks for coming by today.